We're really, really happy to spend this time with you, and we hope that we have a lot of great conversation and great sharing in this session. So I'm going to be joined by Guillermo Rogel, who is our what I was going to say lobbyist, but that's the
legislative advocate.
Our legislative advocate.
Yeah.
And Rebecca Rosada, who is our membership manager. Is that right, Rebecca?
Coordinator, but that's fine.
and Paul Tabayoyon from Yakima Asian Pacific Islander Coalition is one of our frontline transportation advocates. And so our agenda today is we have a little presentation, a little tiny short video that Paul and I are going to tag team on the presentation. And then we have a little short video from our friends at Disability Rights Washington. And then we're going to go to a breakout room because there's lots and lots of us. And our goal today is to hear from you about how you might want to get engaged in this journey to transform transportation from this thing that just makes inequality and makes pollution into something that is more balanced on justice and is cleaner and brings more opportunity to more people. So, Guillermo, Rebecca, Paul, are you ready to go? Did I leave anything out?
One thing I'll add is I'm really glad that you all are here in this space. I think when we were planning our legislative agenda, we recognized that there has to be a time for us to go over our values and what it is a transportation system should be while we're going into legislative session. So we do have a legislative agenda, but we really want this tonight to be an opportunity to learn and discuss what's going on in your communities regarding transportation. But we will have a legislative brief in next week, but this is going to be more of an educational journey, I think, for all of us.
Yeah, so Guillermo reminded me that I totally spaced out, and I should have said this. So we're going to do, after the breakout, don't go away, come back, because Guillermo is going to tell us about what's in store for us in the legislature and how we're working in that space. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get started. I want to make sure that you can see. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Is it showing the right thing?
It's showing the Zoom thing after you join the meeting.
Oh, all right. That's not what I wanted to share. Hang on just a second. Okay, what about now?
There you go.
All right. So just a little bit about Front and Centered as an introduction. If you're not familiar with us, we are a environmental justice, climate justice organization. We have over 70, maybe 80 now member organizations throughout the state. We are a BIPOC-led organization that centers the voice of BIPOC and frontline communities in the conversation and the work of creating more environmental justice. And today we're going to talk about the just transition in transportation. I'm only going to talk for about 10 minutes or so. Paul and I are going to tag team a little bit, and then we have this little video. So basically, at Front and Centered, the framework that we bring to this work is this idea of moving from an extractive economy to a living economy, and we call that the just transition framework. And the idea that the work is to stop the bad and to build the things that are going to sustain a living economy, and to divest from the power that is creating the current extractive economy, and invest and feed the things that will grow the living economy. So what do we mean by transportation system? You know, it's made up of all of these things, you know, of ferries and container ships and airplanes and cars and buses and the places where we walk and the places that we roll when we use a wheelchair and so on and so forth. Trains that are cargo trains and intercity trains and subways and light rail. But ultimately, all of these things, they only do two things. They either move people or they move goods. And today, our transportation system is incredibly imbalanced. It's incredibly imbalanced in ways that that harm our environment, and they particularly harm people of color and lower income people. And we're going to be at front and centered when we're talking about a just transition. We're centering that in our conversation. So I'll come back to this as we talk, but there are some, and this is not, you know, something that's happening on the margins. It is a stark reality of how the current transportation system is so broken and is something that we need to urgently remake. So 25% of us, because we're too young, or because we're old, or because we have a disability, or because we just can't afford it, don't drive. And 45% of the greenhouse gases that are produced in Washington state come from cars and trucks. So it is not, it's the biggest piece of our greenhouse gas impacts. If you remember way back when in July, we had 108 degrees in the heat dome event that happened at the very end of June and the end of July. And you know, all indications are that that was a mass casualty event where 1,200 people in Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia died. Washington state has one of the highest levels of asthma in the country. 1 in 8 women in Washington have asthma. And the pollution that we breathe, the pollution that impacts people, is not distributed evenly. That Blacks and Latinos breathe 56 to 63% more pollution than they create. And yet, 95% of the dollars that we spend as a state, they don't go to fixing or even reducing these impacts that we just talked about. They go to growing those because of the imbalance of the system that we have. 95% of the dollars that we invest in our state go toward auto-oriented uses. And what is, you know, really challenging about that is that this is not a you know, quick, easy thing to turn around, and we need to do it. We need to change this very quickly. So this is a conversation that we need to be having, that we're going to be having today. So I'm going to hand it off to Paul a little bit to show the sort of experience that he has in his community, and how the way in which we have invested in only in certain parts. Oh, Crystal is here. Oh, I'm so glad. Hi, Crystal. We're gonna hear from you in the video in a bit, and then I'm really looking forward to chatting with you. So Paul, take it away and tell me when to flip to the next slide.
Hello, my name is Paul Tabioyan from Yakima, Washington, Asian Pacific Islander Coalition, Community Outreach Coordinator. This is part of the bus route that I used daily while going to college in Yakima. to actually access a bus that would get me from my house to the Yakima Valley College in a timely fashion. But this is actually a downhill grade, and as you see, there's no sidewalks. I actually was labeled disabled by the state of Washington after having a second back surgery, and basically found myself using state welfare systems and other state DVR programs, which allowed me public access, free access to public transportation to get back forth to college. And in the wintertime, this was very, you basically you had to be on the road. Most of the space where the snow was pushed was on the side. And then from the photo, as you look up to the right, there's actually a hill that you actually have to go over, which also has no sidewalks. But this was designated as my handicap route by the Yakima bus service. I called them and asked them what would be the best route for me to get to back and forth to college. And this was actually labeled in the bus book because the bus stop is just around the corner where the blue car is. But this was one of two routes. And go ahead and go to the next slide, Paulo. This is my bus stop that's closest to my house, within a quarter mile. And believe it or not, there is a sidewalk on the other side of the street, but there is no sidewalk on the side of the road in which the buses actually run. This is in Yakima. The public transportation system is really based on one-way routes. Most routes run from 45 minutes to an hour. So it is about a 48 to, depending on the time of day, over an hour, 20 minutes between buses. And to get on this route, I would basically go, and it would be almost a 2-hour ride just to get to the college. But if the route were to go the other direction, it would take less than 15 minutes using the same line. And because in rural communities, a lot of the public transportation in Yakima especially is developed through grants. Any expansions that they have to go through community vetting processes. They haven't requested a lot of monies to actually complete the sidewalks. And this is where we see, this is Lincoln, and they had actually moved the bus stop from go ahead and go to the next slide, Paulo. From the older sign position to the farther position, which is actually in a hole between the property lines. So we really see that this, excuse me, in essence, the 30 mile per hour, excuse me, the 30 mile per hour road here is actually driven mostly at 35 or 40 mile per hour. And if you do have any kind of inclement weather, you do have to actually walk on the road because as you get closer to the actual bus stop, it is unnavigable in any form for a handicapped person. And I found it difficult at times with my walking disability just to reach the bus stop. They do have other services in Yakima, which they say, well, you can use a system called Dial-A-Ride. But what we find is that's only supposed to be used for medical purposes and has limitations and can't be used for work. So what I really found in analyzing the bus system in Yakima was that with these long distance one-way routes, often going out of town, this bus is actually going out of town as opposed to in town, that they are virtually unusable for work purposes. From this bus stop right here, I cannot physically reach the DSH office, which has been moved because of COVID, but also the unemployment service office, which is now in Union Gap. It actually arrives at that facility at 5:30. And I think a lot of our communities, especially the rural communities, need requirements from the state that really focus on the rural issues of transportation. And this is one of them. You have a bus system that functions, but it doesn't function enough to actually be utilized for work purposes. If you drive around Yakima, there are help wanted signs on every single facility that you can find, from large scale employers like the packing plants and things like that, to just everyday services, hotels, restaurants. So the need for employment, but the need for public transportation to help people of low income, and especially with COVID, with recent changes in jobs. I know so many people through my church and through our community outreach that's done in our API community that a lot of people have seen decreases in income. And if they could actually use the bus, they would, instead of splitting cars and struggling to get to work on time, they would rather use public transportation. And Paolo knows this. We've last year we had an advocate, one of the farm workers who works at one of the local packing plants, actually wanted public transportation. There is no form of transportation that public transportation that reaches some of these very large scalar employers. So we see kind of the inequity from their even rural to urban centers that, like, even when I lived in downtown Seattle, my employer offered free bus services, and that's what I chose to work downtown Seattle for over 5 years. So I think those kind of programs should also be offered to some of these large scale industrial players, because in a place like Yakima, a lot of transportation hubs can be created to identify, especially with new development on the west side of Yakima, that we need to be able to move people through public transportation and not just cars. And I think that might be my last image there.
Cool. That's perfect, Paul. I think this image here that makes me think, what amazing, incredible amount of disparity we are able to tolerate in our transportation system. I mean, because this road is smooth. Like they had just repaved this road, it looks like. And yet, if you have a disability, even when the snow isn't on the road, right? Because what you were telling me is that when there's snow and the snow plow comes in here, they just dump it onto this person's lawn, and then you're really standing or sitting in your wheelchair on the road to get this bus, right?
And in Yakima, in discussing it with some of the Yakima public officials, they acknowledge that Yakima does not have a handicap requirement for the bus stop. And usually that's something that if they know that there's a handicapped person in the area, they can advocate for it. But those sometimes are the things that could take months and months to put in. A lot of stops have seats, some don't have seats. So it's dependent upon where you live in town and where they feel volume riders might be. I do know this stop is used quite a bit by some of the students in the area. So it is a well-used stop, but we see the movement of the sign was because the people were in the people's yard and it was killing the grass, and that was unacceptable to the landowner. Another thing to mention is on the sidewalk across the street on several days a week, it's garbage day. So the garbage cans are actually placed on the sidewalk. So even if you were to use the other side of the street and you were in a wheelchair, you can't roll down the sidewalk because there's so many physical obstructions that you would never be able to make it to the store, which is less than 1.5 miles in the other direction.
So, Paul, thanks so much. Paul is gonna be moderating one of our breakout rooms, so you'll see Paul again. So that condition that Paul was describing happens all over our state, where we just have unfinished business. We've created a space in between the curbs, or where motor vehicles travel, that is pretty safe, that's pretty reliable, and we have not done so for when people get out of their cars or when people are not using their cars. I want to play a video now from our friends at Disability Mobility Initiative, which is a program of Disability Rights Washington. It's just a few minutes, and you'll be able to hear from lots of people's voices, including Crystal Montero, who just joined. And I think this is really powerful. Let me see if I can get this. Can you see this? Come on. And I need to do something here to make sure that I am optimizing sound so that you can hear it. All right. Guillermo, you give me a thumbs up when you can hear it.
When I had my brain bleed in California, I moved up here because that's where I have all my friends and family. But then you have sidewalks like this, which to me is an embarrassment.
Like where I'm standing is on grass where a sidewalk is supposed to be. So when it's rainy, like Washington often is, it gets really muddy and hard to walk. So you almost feel like you're safer walking on the edge of the road.
My worry is somebody's really zipping hell-bent for election and I don't get out of the way in time, you know?
Without transportation, people with disabilities become isolated. And when we become isolated, we become depressed.
Originally, I moved out to Edmonds because that's what my roommates and I could afford. It means taking an hour and a half, 2 hours to get anywhere that I need to go.
We can't get across the street sometimes to get a bus or to get some food or some water because there's all these barriers in between.
My trip to school takes me 2 hours. If I end up missing one of buses, it takes me around 3 hours.
Right. I think buses and ground transportation should be something that is seen as anybody and everybody should use that.
I'd have all the sidewalks paved that are anywhere anybody can walk, including and especially bus stops.
I'm looking forward to the day where we have some kind of transportation.
If you can make a lane wider for big trucks, why can't you make a sidewalk for people who are traveling that don't have access to driving?
People like me shouldn't be an afterthought. Like, we are here, there's plenty of us, and we don't just want to stay cooped up in our houses because a curb cut is missing or there's roots growing and throwing off the sidewalk, and we don't want to be harassed in the street because that's our only option to be safer. And those are things that are preventable, so we should prevent them.
Excellent. I seem to have lost everybody. Oops. But you can still.
Yeah, we can hear and see you.
You can still hear and see me. All right. So last year, Front and Center did a huge series of listening sessions and a survey, and we talked to communities all over the state. And we asked them about, what's going on in transportation in your community. What are the things that you want? And basically, what we heard over and over again is we want better transit, we want cleaner air, and we want safer streets. And then we went and we met with our electeds. We worked really hard to get this message across. We brought tons of people to testify about the transportation about the transportation investments that in Washington State we call a transportation package. And the transportation packages that both the House and the Senate proposed last year were completely out of whack with these priorities. And so this year, we're trying again, and we're taking a slightly different tack. What we've done this year is to say we really need to frame our conversations not so much on how much money needs to go to this program versus another program, but really use that just transition framework and say, let's stop the bad. The vast majority of the investments that Washington is proposing to make are to expand new highways that will create more pollution, create more asthma, create more disparity in our states. And when we do that, we rob the cities and the rural areas the ability to build the transit and the sidewalks that we need. And so what we've done this year is to work with our membership to create a transportation bill of rights and to really approach this from the question of, well, it's not whether we can afford it or not. These are just basic rights. And I'm gonna sort of go through these because they're really important. And regardless of whether you're able to drive or whether you're not able to drive. You deserve dignity when you go out into the world. And it's really, really, really important that we enumerate what these rights are and that we demand them. So the first one is that no one dies or is seriously injured traveling in our roads, streets, or sidewalks. A lot of people don't know this, but we're experiencing a 30-year high in pedestrian deaths in the United States, and Washington State is no different. And it's wiped out all of the gains of the last 30 years. Then we're right back where we were in the 90s. And disproportionately, it is people of color, and in really disproportionate ways, it's Native Americans who are suffering the most from pedestrian crashes and deaths. Number two, every household should be able to access groceries within 20 minutes without a car. Our transportation system should not harm people from pollution or noise. We should expect protection from the climate crisis today and for future generations. And that all trips that are less than a mile should be easily and enjoyably achieved without a car, including for people with disabilities. No household should spend more than 45% of its income on housing, transportation, and energy. And every kid who wants to should be able to bike, walk, and roll safely to school or to a bus stop. And transit service is frequent, spans the day and night so people can get to work and come back. And then this sort of foundational one, we shouldn't have a society where being happy requires a car, that being able to engage with society, to have a job, to go to school requires a car. So over 200 people have endorsed our Transportation Bill of Rights. And so when you get a chance, please visit our site and sign up as an organization or as an individual. And Guillermo and Rebecca and Paul and I and others have been speaking to our elected officials and saying, is there anything here that you think is not really fundamentally important? It's not something that everybody deserves. And Guillermo, to a person, everybody says, oh, I don't disagree with any of this. And yet, when you see the budget proposals, when you see the proposals that they're putting forward, they don't really get us here. So what we're proposing is that we first stop the bad and we just say categorically, no new highways. One of the tools that we've partnered with an organization called Rocky Mountain Institute and 350 Washington and Disability Rights Washington to bring to our state is a calculator that shows that for every lane mile of extra highway that you build, you actually create more traffic, more pollution, more asthma, and you don't solve the fundamental disparities that our transportation system has developed. And number two, we're proposing that the state be responsible for making sure that every single community has a frequent, accessible transit network that by 2030, at least 50% of the people can walk to in 10 minutes or less. Now, here's the really important thing that we want to work on with you and in the next coming months and years is there is this basic disparity in the way that we fund roads versus the way that we fund transit. Essentially, the state and the federal government say, roads come standard. We will fund those 100%. If you want transit, then your community needs to raise its own money to pay for bus operations, to pay for the improvements to the bus stops. Basically, the condition that Paul described, where Yakima has one-way bus routes and it's impossible to get anywhere because the bus comes every hour and 30 minutes. The way that we fund transit now, where we expect the locals to pay, is creating this widening disparity between places like Seattle, where we have the means and the political leaning to tax ourselves to fund transit, and places like Yakima, where neither of those things are there. So what we're saying is it's now time for us to create a standard, that it's not acceptable for some places to just have buses that are there once an hour, once every hour and a half. That this is a basic part of having a society. And one of the things that we use as an analogy is nobody goes and rents an apartment and sits there thinking before they go to see it, or when they're looking at the ad, oh, please, 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 I hope they have running water. Because we've made that just an expectation of the way that we live. And transit should be just like running water or electricity. It should be something that you can rely on. It should be something that is an expected part of the way that our towns and cities and rural areas are built and planned. So now we're going to go to breakout, and we want to hear how these things are affecting you in your life, in your communities, if you belong to an organization, a church, or a community group or an advocacy group, how you're working on these issues and how we could work together. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Rebecca is going to press the magic breakout button.
So again, thanks everyone for being here on a Thursday night. And Paulo is in DC, so he's actually here at 10 p.m. So thank you, Paulo, for helping lead this. Again, my name is Guillermo Rogel. I'm the legislative advocate with Front and Centered. It's really my job to help connect and elevate all of the work that communities are doing to the statewide level. So if there is a statewide solution, whether it's policy or a budget, my job is to help communicate that to our 49 senators and to our 98 House of Representative members. So I just want to give a quick overview of how the package is negotiated and a little bit of what you can expect in the state legislature in the next few weeks. So Paulo and I have been referencing a transportation package. Just note that every year Washington funds transportation. The buses have to run, highways have to get renovated and improved. But a transportation package, the way that we're talking about it, happens about every 5 to 6 years, depending on how ambitious the legislature is being. And this is where they invest new money. They recognize that for the level of service that they want, for the frequency of transit, they have to invest new money. So that's something that the legislature is considering right now, is what is the next transportation package going to look like? And it really mirrors what's going on at the federal level. I know it's really hard to avoid, but all of the bills that are going on in Congress, and specifically the federal infrastructure package, they're one-time things that bring a lot of money. So Paulo and I, Rebecca, the Front and Center team and community, along with 350 and disability rights, are going in with very specific asks so that a transportation package reflects everything that we just covered. Something that intersects and acknowledges the impact that transportation has on climate, safety, and communities of color. So I could spend about 3 hours going through this graphic here, which is how a bill becomes law. But just know that, I won't do that, but just know that for our purpose, the transportation bill is negotiated the same way that any other bill in the legislature is considered. But there are some major differences in the transportation package. The first is that it's a lot more behind the scenes. It's something that you hear often, and I recognize the irony is I'm a lobbyist, but lobbyists have a lot of influence on how a transportation package gets negotiated. Folks who donate to campaigns have a lot of influence. There is a lot of political dynamic that goes on to how, for example, $1 billion, $10 billion package is negotiated and passed. And it's, our job is front and center to go assess what's going on, report back to community, and then figure out our next steps. Because it's really hard for folks to understand everything that's going on behind the scenes. The second is that it's super dense, and it's necessary to implement the budget. When you go and look at our operating budget bill, for example, it's over 100 pages. It's really hard to decipher. It's not like other bills, which could be a page or two. So we really have to spend our time going through policy language. And the other thing, it's typically a bipartisan affair. The last time a transportation package was passed was in 2015. And this was with 37 members of the Senate voting yes, 7 voting no, and 5 abstentions. So there are 49 total members. Right now there is a 28-21 split between Democrats and Republicans. So Democrats have 28 votes, Republicans have 21. There's a Democrat included in the Republicans, but in essence, this just shows that in 2015, it was bipartisan. There were Republicans who joined Democrats in passing that package. So I'm just going to cover a little bit of what's impacting the next transportation package so you all understand context, because you can come to the legislature with the best idea in the world. And like Paulo said, no one will disagree with you. But there are factors that influence whether or not the legislature or a specific legislator is going to vote yes on your package or not. And these are some of them. The first one is that this session is short. Compared to the session that we had this year in 2021, it is 60 days compared to 105. And transportation is not the only thing that the legislature will negotiate. So it's cramming, COVID relief, transportation, revenue, climate, all of these things into 60 days. They ran out of time this year in 21 to negotiate a package. They might run out of time this time around by March 10th. It's a non-budget year. So the Washington State Legislature budgets every 2 years. We just did a huge budget year in 21. The year coming up in 2022 is just an adjustment year. So we can't really make huge investments, but it's possible. The third thing, which is something that we always hear about all the time, is elections. Similar at the federal level, we're going to have midterm elections here in Washington in November, where the House of Representatives will be up for re-election. Some of the senators, they stagger them, their elections, but folks want to be re-elected. And so will they have the guts to take hard votes this session, which might mean increasing some taxes to get the kinds of investments and projects that they want? So it's just always a consideration that you hear from every legislator. Might not tell you, but they know it, that they want to get reelected. The other thing is that there is a new chair for the Senate Transportation Committee. We actually just found out about an hour and a half ago that is going to be Senator Marco Lias from the Everett area. He is going to be the new chair for the Senate Transportation Committee. He is replacing Senator Steve Hobbs, who got appointed to be the Secretary of State in Washington. And the way that he thought about the transportation package is a lot different than the way that Senator Lias is going to be thinking about the package. And for us, we think that opens up a door and an opportunity to chat new ideas with the Senate. The other is that there's new revenue coming in. There's a cap and trade program that passed last year that Front and Center took a con position on, but it is going to generate revenue. So the legislature is going to have to appropriate money related to that, and also any new revenue that comes in. The other thing is the House and the, go ahead, Paula. Do you have a question? Oh, no. The other thing is that the House and the Senate have different approaches. And you'll always hear that when I meet with the Senate or the House. They'll typically say, we'll go talk to the House. or go talk to the Senate. They're going to be the people you have to talk to. This package is looking like it might not be bipartisan the way it was in 2015. It might be a Democrat-only bill, which is a lot less room for the Democrats to maneuver if they have to count on every single Democrat to vote yes. Yeah, so coming up, there's a little bit more legislative stuff here, but just to keep it all chronological, Front and Center is going to be hosting this same presentation, but in Espanol. So if you all here can help spread the word and you enjoyed this presentation so much, maybe you even want to attend it in Spanish, the registration link can be found on our website. But we just really want to help promote this since, you know, ability to speak English or not shouldn't be a barrier in participating in this kind of advocacy. As I mentioned, legislative session begins in a few weeks, January 10th through March 10th. That's when we'll be conducting all our work. And I'm sure if there is a transportation package that gets negotiated, it will come down to the last minute, maybe like March 1st, March 5th, around that time. We're recording this, so if I'm right, there'll be a little reward. But the questions that I'm asking myself going into this session is there going to be a big transportation package, or are they going to start to scale down their version of a transportation package? The next one is, how are they going to shift their approach to a transportation package? What Paulo mentioned at the beginning is we really want to make sure that the values that we are highlighting in the Transportation Bill of Rights, all of these things that we're prioritizing, actually stick into the heads of legislators. Because we can talk about investments all day. We can say there's $100 million that go here, 200 million here, but we really want to make sure that the legislature understands the nexus of transportation and climate, the effect that their transportation package decisions have on the 25% of people who can't drive or don't drive. Again, the revenue question. And then the thing we're looking for after session is going to be the process for how the federal infrastructure money gets dispersed. I mentioned this in a prior slide, but there was a federal infrastructure bill that passed. Washington is getting billions of dollars, and there will be a process, an advisory process for what I understand is to be the governor's office to allocate these funds. Paulo, anything to add on federal infrastructure money?
Yeah, I don't know if am I on mute? Can you hear me?
You're good.
So the federal government passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is a big deal, and there are really good things in there that are just good, you know, like getting rid of lead pipes so people have clean water, expanding broadband into the rural neighborhoods. But we are very concerned that when it comes to transportation, the lion's share of those dollars are traditionally have been directed towards highway expansions and are running really crosswise to the climate goals and the environmental justice goals that we need to be pursuing. So there is a big investment, in fact, the biggest ever investment in transit from the federal government in this bill, but it's almost all for capital. So that means if, you know, Laura is the director of transportation for a town in Washington, we are saying, Laura, you can buy buses, but you need to figure out how to raise local dollars to hire drivers. So in this way, the by itself, the bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed, there's another acronym for it, the Infrastructure and something Climate Act, IICA, or no, IIJ, Infrastructure something and Jobs Act. By itself, without the state taking a big leap into something that it's never done before, which is fund transit operations. The Yakimas of the world, where Paul is relying on a route that runs every 90 minutes. Where you heard, where we heard Crystal say in Tacoma, she'll wait for the bus for 45 minutes, and when it gets there, there will already be 2 people with a wheelchair there, and she has to wait for another bus. Unless we step up and say there needs to be an investment in transit operations from the state, the bipartisan infrastructure bill is not going to help Paul. It is not going to help Crystal. Is not going to close the gap that we have in opportunities, and help us reduce our burden in terms of climate. So what the advocacy that we're doing hopefully is going to be a complement to the new infrastructure dollars that are coming from Washington, from the other Washington.
Yeah, great, thank you, Paulo. That's all I had on my end for the process. Again, want to direct you to our website where you can take action, both to receive updates and then sign on to our Transportation Bill of Rights, because we'll need that support once legislative session starts. For example, there was a senator in Eastern Washington who didn't believe that there were people who didn't drive in his district. And we had to have a meeting with people who didn't drive, who had a disability, and say, like, these are constituents, these are people with a real lived experience in your district. So we do need folks behind this, and would really appreciate you all spreading the word about the training next week, and signing on to our Transportation Bill of Rights on our website. But yeah, thank you all for having me, and Paulo, I'll throw it back to you.
The Transit Center has a really, really awesome little 9-minute video that talks about the legacy of racism in transit and transit planning, and how agencies are working to change that. And I'm just going to post this here in the chat. Didn't get a chance to share it with you all today, but it's a really good video. Rebecca is going to be hosting some showings of an amazing movie about the Seattle highway rebellion of the 1960s called Ramps to Nowhere. And that is such an inspiring story about a people's movement who stopped this. It's shocking the way that they wanted to drive 6 or 7 new highways through Seattle was going to destroy the Central District and the Black neighborhood in the Central District. And there was a movement that was led in large part by the Black Panther Party. And so please watch our site. I think Rebecca we may also, since you signed up for this, if you said yes, you want to be contacted, we'll make sure that you get an invitation to that. And with that, I think that's all the time that we have. And we look forward to seeing you during the legislative session and to working together some more.
Thank you all so much.